Okay, very good. Now, what to this point in the first two sessions, we have in the first two sessions we went over, right? So getting started with select star, right? So understanding the environment just a little bit. Last session, Brian, you went over how am I modifying or inserting data. Right? We talked about modifying data a bit, and putting some of those tables to work. So in this session, we want to expand on those pieces a bit, and go talk about some of the things beyond or that are cousins to the tables, right? But the other pieces that you can add to your list as you begin working with different objects in SQL Server. So, and you know what? First off, so I guess with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into a view, right? So here, and now, so I have installed Zoom It on here, so hopefully that will make it a little bit easier to see. And you'll forgive me, I can't see y'all at the same time. Okay, so there we go. Looks like you guys can, zoom in. So here's my database. I've connected, and we're talking about Learn SQL. And you'll see that there are, right? So normally I'm over here at tables, but I also have views. Now we'll get in and talk a little bit about security. Programmability is beyond the scope of what we're introducing in these sessions, but just know that you can see pieces. There could be pieces in here in the programmability piece. Service broker and storage. Generally, you're not going to have pieces here, and if you do, right, just tread carefully. Ask before you proceed with caution, right, and probably ask somebody. Synonyms and external resources, also unlikely that you'll have pieces under here, and again, right beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about. So tables, views, programmability, again, there'll be pieces in here, and then security is what we'll get into. Now, we've talked about, right, so our tables, they have columns. Those columns have data types, and there's some constraints. So as we've talked about T-SQL, right, you're putting together queries. And so there's some deletes, updates. Well, I guess I shouldn't have gotten creative. But in this example, right, I have select star from cat, and I'm adding a filter. I'm adding a filter criteria. And sometimes these queries, obviously what we're showing here is fairly simple. However, as you move forward, you can start adding all kinds of different things. How do you see the constraints? Okay, very good. So just to finish this thought, what we can do is we can encapsulate that logic into a view to then make it easier for me to be able to pass that to Brian, right? Because we all know that Brian doesn't really know SQL all that well, and he doesn't want to do all that typing. So he just wants to do a select star from a view, and we can package some of that hierarchy in there. Okay, so Kevin asks, how do we see the constraints? Okay, and that is a great answer, or great question. And I need to explain that there are a couple different types of constraints. Okay, so first we've got, let me just pull up my cheat sheet here. So some examples of constraints could be not null, unique, default, or check constraints. Okay. Now, these types of constraints are going to be on the table. Okay. And the easiest, so in here, I see that word constraint, but now I'm curious what I would do, because That's the way I like to look at it, is I would actually script out this table and then take a peek. All right. So here I've got what's called a foreign key constraint, but none of these tables have, for example, a unique or a default or a check constraint. You will see, however, that each of them have either the null or not null constraint, right? And we talked a little bit about this in terms of, can that column be empty? Yes or no? I could add additional pieces like unique, meaning I'm only allowed to have one value of that type or of that column in there. So just for easy numbers, right, I put a unique constraint on integers. I add 1 to the first record, 2 to the second, 3 to the fourth. Then I want to add 1 again. I wouldn't be able to do so because that column has to be unique, right?
I would say that by default, your primary key is a unique, has a unique constraint, even though it doesn't spell it out in your script.
Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, so the other types of constraints are the keys, right? So these are foreign keys, meaning that, so in this example, that's the primary key, right? So this column has to be unique, right? And here there is a constraint or a relationship with the owner identifier, meaning that when I want to insert data into this column, it's going to go and check the owner table, the pet owner table, and the whatever is entered into this column has to exist in this table, or it won't allow me to insert it. So those are the types of constraints. So hopefully that's helpful. But thanks for the question, Kevin. Okay, so going back in here again, I have some code that I've written. I don't want my users, whoever I'm going to give this to have to worry about all the logic, right? I've put in pieces here, and now I just want to give it to them and allow them to run it. Or perhaps even I have an application and I'm like, you know what? This is how we're going to figure out the price of an item, or this is how we're going to go about determining, right, what the most recent order is, or whatever the logic might be, right? So I can encapsulate this in a view, so I can run this individually. And again, if I just highlight it and click execute, I need to change to my database. So here you can see, right, it tells you what database you're connected to, and that will change. And so sometimes you'll run something and you'll get an error like that, and you'll be like, oh, how do I get to the database I need to be? And that's how it will tell you. So I can run that, I get the results, but I'm going to encapsulate that in this create view. Oh, brother. And apparently I didn't clean up after myself after I was doing my demo, and I have already created this view and it's complaining that it is there, right? So that's the error I'm getting. It's like, hey, I can only have one view named v_search for Garfield. Now at this point, I feel like we should probably talk a little bit about naming conventions, right? And this is where we can enter into some holy war, right, on how things get named. My suggestion is follow the pattern that was set before you. Okay, so if you see others using a naming convention, you may not like it, you may not want it, they may not be your first choice. For example, here I have the view as v_, right? and they might have something like search for Garfield _V. Don't fight it. Just embrace what they have, because having multiple naming conventions is worse, right? Is not as good as having only one of the wrong naming convention. You feel what I'm saying, Brian?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so now that I've created, so I guess so as you see that, normally what we're going to see naming conventions, every once in a while you'll see them on the table, but we see that a lot of that in the views and in the programmability and the stored procedures and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
People get really, they can have strong feelings about how things should be named. So, okay, so now that view is created, I can simply do a select star from that view. And what it will do is go through and it says, okay, I'm going to take a peek at what this is. And it's actually running this query inside of it. So I've packaged that up and made it available, right, for another user or for, an application or something like that, right? Now, the nice thing about this is that I can then do something like this, should the need arise, right? And so later I can go through and I can change this, and then my users, they don't have to change what they run to see different things, right? So again, this may or may not, this can be useful in certain situations. But again, I'm able to package that up, make it available, and then let people use it. Now, the other big reason that people will go to views, and you'll see this in applications where they don't want to give access to the base tables. They want to give access to views and let people interact with views and through stored procedures. So this then kind of brings us to the security pieces. And
while you're getting there, Carlos, I'll just mention a couple other things that I use views for a lot.
Okay.
And one is when you want your users to be able to query across multiple tables. So if I have a join between the cat and the owner table, and I can set that up for them, and all they have to do is select from the view, as opposed to doing the joins and them. Maybe they don't have the knowledge to do the joins, or I don't want them to have to go through that. I could do a view that links multiple tables together, and they can pull that data with one simple query. And the other thing is that I use it very often for reporting and business intelligence type reports, when there might be a very complicated query that you want to store in. You don't need to store as a stored procedure, and we haven't gotten to that, but using stored procedures, a lot of times what you do in a view, you can do in a stored procedure. So just keep that in mind when you get to the programmability part. Sure. But a lot of times these complex queries you just set up as a view, and then all you have to do from your application is call that view, or do a select against that view. And the one other thing I would mention about views is that you can do a where clause on a view. We didn't really discuss that. In his example where he's got the right there, he could say, just what he's doing there, breed of cat equals whatever. So you can filter down the view like that.
Right. Yeah. So where I was actually going to go with this is, now one of the things that I'm going to what I should put here, do not do, and that is create view Right? So while you are technically allowed to do this, right? Right. So now what I've done here is I've created levels of complexity here. Right. So I've created this view. So I have to open up this view to I have another view that I then have to go and take a peek at, right, to really understand where everything comes from, right, or can be. Now, again, these are super simple examples, and obviously I run that and it comes back instantaneously. And you're like, well, Carlos, what's the problem? The problem is that, right, this is the Intro to SQL course, and there are only like 500 records in each of these tables.
Right.
And when you get out into the real world, right, there's going to be lots of information. And SQL Server doesn't do well. They're called nested views. So views on top of views.
And on top of that, if you follow the logic of what you just did, we would be getting only short hair breeds for cats that started with GAR. The name of the cat was GAR, and that wouldn't be obvious from the little select start you just did.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's an example of how an assumption can be made where it's like, oh, right, I have this list. Now let me go ahead and let me go ahead and put some additional logic on top of that, right? Always, I shouldn't say always, but just be careful when you start making assumptions about what's coming back from your views, right? And I know so it's going to seem like duplicates, but a lot of the times we're going to suggest that you just go ahead and even just copy what was in that first view into the next one and then massage it as you need, right? Instead of doing a select from review. Okay, and so this is where we then get into a little bit of the security piece. Okay, so there are 2 layers of security to SQL Server. So here you've got logins. Logins is, for example, what you need to connect. So when I hit connect, I need to create a login. Those logins then need to have permissions on the database. Okay. Very good. And so you'll see that in here, in these users. Okay. Now, certain people like SA or like this admin, I can have rights at the server level, which give me access to all the databases. We generally don't want to do that, right? So, Kim, I know Kim's on here. So Kim's going to get access to her ERP system. Okay, Dan's not going to want perhaps to give her access to everything, but I do want to give you access to this one database. I would do that in here in user mappings, and here it's saying, hey, you only have access to these databases, right?
Carlos, we do have a comment from Kevin.
Sure.
But with medium to large companies, none I have worked with allow users to query the DB even views.
Oh, well, that's one way to do it, right? I mean, I think if you're, well, I don't know, man. So different people are going to have different ways of going about that. It's also possible that so you may not have SQL Server management access, right? But you might be querying through something like Power BI,
right,
or some other reporting tool, right? That's going to inherit some of these same ideas.
Right. A lot of when you create a Power BI, SQL Server reporting services report or even a Crystal report. When you develop it, you set up the connection and you in the login that's going to be used to make that connection. And a lot of times it's the user's login, but sometimes it's defaulted to a login that's created for doing reporting.
Yeah.
That has its own specific permissions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously I can't force them to give you permission. However, if you can identify, if your role, you can justify access to the data. One of the things that you can ask them is, okay, well, give me a view, right? Mm-hmm. Give me access to some of the tables. There are going to be instances where even read access to the database can be problematic because there could be PII information in there, right? Credit card information, those types of pieces. And if they haven't put in, safety, guards there, but this would be potentially a way is like, okay, well, I need, if you can figure out, I need access to this table. Hey, create a role for me and give me select access, right? We could take a peek at that. So that's what we're going to do here. So what we want to do is we want to create a role, and I haven't created that drop. So this role is going to say, instead of having access to everything, I want to give you access just to a few things. Okay, so I create a role, in this case, it's dogs only, and I am going to say, this person can only see the pet owner and the dog tables. Okay. And now when I connect, let me just make sure that because all of a sudden I feel like I have just forgotten what that password is. Okay. So now in this case, when I connect, I can do Windows Authentication. I'm connecting with this user, right, to show that it is a separate user. Cannot open.
You got Report Builder. You hit Report Builder and your.
Thank you.
Go ahead and do the connect again.
Oh yeah, no. What I needed to do here, which I guess I don't show here. What did I miss a step? Oh yeah, I guess I don't. I didn't include in the T-SQL was coming in here and adding this person, right, to this role. So I made So I have my user Dog Lover. I go in and I say, hey, Dog Lover can only have access to this database and only to the things that I put into that role. Now I click OK. Now I should be able to connect. There we go. And if I go in here, so now this is one of the little weirdness about security. Because I have public access, I can see the names of other databases. Okay. However, you'll notice that when I go in there, it won't let me see anything in there. I can just see the name, right? So I should be able to go here. I expand that. And then now you can see that I only have access to these two tables, right? And I can do the same thing with the views and whatnot there. So, okay. And then we already showed the alter piece. So for that, I guess any other questions on working with views or anything about security? Oh, let's see. Is SQL injection, courses ties down security, many employers forced to be layer? Yeah. Is SQL injection the main fear? So it is a fear, but I would think so PII or having that data travel, right? You get read access to the database. In theory, you can export that to Excel and it can leave the company, right? So being able to limit that is, is a possibility. However, at some point, right? I mean, particularly as analysts, right? They need to let you roll around with the data, right? I mean, so you're going to get it in some way, shape, or another.
But that is a reason to embed your SQL code in SQL Server as opposed to having the web developers just write their select, update, insert statements in whatever code they're developing on the front end for the web. So that can prevent a lot of that SQL injection type stuff.
Yeah.
And you get in a big debate with developers as to where does that SQL code belong. They like to type it in on their side, but a lot of them do.
Right. So so the very nickel tour, right, is a bit more nuanced than this. But let's go back to here, and we've got my alter view. Okay. So SQL injection. Ultimately, at the end of the day, SQL injection is my query is written to do this, right? But the injection piece of it is going to add something to it to get more information than was originally the way it was originally set up, right?
Or to actually try to modify your data,
Or to modify the data. That
right,
would be the other piece, right? So like on this would be more like on the update pieces, right?
Yep.
So you have delete from dog or name of dog equals test, right? And they could add or, right, name of dog dog
Yeah, we don't see your screen if you.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sharing anymore. Okay, I guess I gotta do that. That would be helpful. Okay, so then this is what. So in this case, right, this is originally. Oops. Oh man, I cannot. Let me try that again. So this was the original query, right? Delete from dog where dog name equals name of test. The injection piece of it is going to try to add something in here, right? And allow you, in this case, manipulate or modify your data. And that can be, a problem, particularly when you're trying to, do permissions or do security. And it's like, hey, is this user in the, is dog lover in there? And you're like, oh no, not only dog lover, but let me add cat lover while I'm there, right? And now they have access to the system, right? Things like that. So everything that we've talked about here, not possible for SQL injection to happen.
Right.
It can happen generally in dynamic SQL is the biggest area. And again, that's going to be into the stored procedures. So Kevin asked, what are stored procedures? And so I feel like I'm going to have to go ahead and at least show this. And not with this. So we're going to do something simple. So a stored procedure is a package. It's a way to group logic together, right? That's a bit more customizable. So instead of, so somewhat like this, oops. I guess, if I run this guy, oh. Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm like, what is going on here? Okay, so I've just created this table here, right? It comes back with these things. So now I could do something like this, right? Create procedure. And again, right? Don't get too concerned about this this name. Ugh, that's not what I wanted. And then at months int as select star from where at. Okay. So what I've done is I've created a package where instead of, because people are going to want to query this in multiple different ways, right? So instead of always saying, you know, hey, I want it to be 24. Oh, actually, I guess what I really should do here. That's kind of confusing. Select. And let me get rid of this. There we go. So I want to select these things from dog, but this month from owner, right? People, you know, so Brian may be interested in 10 months. I could be interested in 24 months, right? Kim could be interested in 60 months, you know, whatever it is. So this is going to allow me to create this. I think this will run. Must declare. Now all of a sudden, right, in real time, I'm doing this. I thought that was.
What's it saying? Must declare
the scalar variable at months. I'm passing that in. I feel like, oh, here, that's what it is.
Yeah,
there we go.
You go.
Missing a parameter. So now I could do, now instead of doing select, I'm executing, right? And then I'm going to pass in at months equals 10. So what I've done is I've basically parameterized the query, right? And I'm now instead of just creating a view, I'm creating a way for people to dynamically. I mean, I'm giving, you know, this is a fairly simple example, right? But a different one would be like, hey, I want to pass in an organization, and that organization is going to do something, right? Or I can add multiple parameters, and so this is a way for you to allow, yeah, multiple or different things to happen, right, with the code. So does that make sense? I know that was probably a little bit longer than I anticipated, but
that makes sense. You could pretty much anything you do in a view, you could pretty much do in a stored procedure as well. But the view is more static, whereas Carlos just said a stored procedure can be more dynamic because you can add parameters. You cannot add a parameter to a view. And also with the procedure, it's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but you can also do your CRUD, your updates, deletes, inserts. You can do those through stored procedures as well.
Yeah. Well, you can create new tables. I mean, it just gives you a bit more flex. You know, there's just more that you can do there, right? So, okay. So the last piece we wanted to talk about, and I think, Brian, I'm going to give this back over to you, right?
Yeah, sure.
We wanted to go through and talk about working with dates. So we have really just been pulling information, but one of the very first things that we see a lot of is, okay, now I want to look at how things have happened over time. That's a very common request. So what we're going to do here is take a peek at working with time and how to do that.
Okay, so I don't need that guy. Let me get to the end here. And so following along with actually, I'm going to step over here first. And here's some examples of different functions that you have available to you with date and time. And some of these you'll use a lot, and some you'll probably hardly ever use. And the first is so a lot of times you want to get what's the current date and time, and there's a function called get date, and if you process that, that gives you the current date and time. Now there are multiple date formats. Let me pull that over here real quick. I have a little just snapshot of some of the different data types that you have with dates. So you have your time, which is just the time piece of your date of the date and time. The date, which is just obviously just your date. The small date and time, which you probably won't use that much. You can read the definition there, but it just gives you it gives a different range of dates that you can actually use. And then you have date time, which is so mostly date time, and date time is probably what I see used most often. Date time 2 gives you the same format, except date time 2 has more nanoseconds. So if you need to be that precise, then you would want to use date time 2. And then date time offset just gives you the offset from the universal, or the
UTC.
Yeah, the UTC is the universal time. I forget what the C stands for, but the UT is your universal time.
Yes,
Coordinate.
Greenwich, England, right? The center of the universe, right?
That's right. So anyway, time, date time, and date are usually what I see used most. And of course, get date that I just used, which is the get date function. It gives you your date and your time. There's other ways to get that same information. There's a current timestamp, which I believe, actually, let me just run all these guys all at one time here. So you can see that the current timestamp and the get date returns the exact same value. That's just two different ways to get it. I normally use get date, and when you run get date, you have to have the open and close parentheses. Sys date and time gives you more of that date time 2 value being returned with the more precision on your time. And then the sys date time offset shows you the time, but it also tells you what your offset is from the universal time, the Greenwich or Greenwich time. And get UTC date actually gives you the date of the universal time. So you can see right there that the time is 1640 or 1842 on the UTC date, which is 5 hours ahead of Eastern time, which is what I'm on here in my example. And that's just ways that you can use in your code to get the current value of the current date and time. Now there's other functions I think we should discuss, and Carlos, maybe you can help me here with the there's a lot of times you'll see your date and you'll have to convert it to a different value in order to present it. And I don't really have a good example of that, but there's a formula, or there's a function called convert. So I could take let's say the get date, our current date, and convert it to a varchar. If for some reason I needed to, let's say a good example of this would be if I wanted to output text and concatenate it with into a string. and I wanted to say something like the current date is, the and show the actual date, you could do a convert, and that'll actually take the get date, which returns a date time format, and make sure I have this right here, and we'll return it in. And actually, since I didn't give it a format, by default it came back as December 16th, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Now you can also convert that and use a format with your to whatever date format you want to see. So for example, if you're Europe, and I think Europe puts the date or the date number first, there's ways to convert that with a value that identifies what date format it is.
Yeah.
I don't have that shown here.
Yeah, so that happens after your get date, your open and close parenthesis, if you put a comma.
Yep.
And then do like 110.
110 is, that's right.
I can't remember. There's a list somewhere out in the internet.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them, and I wish I had the example. So right there, that's 12/16/2021. I think 111 is one of them. 2021/12/16.
Flashes, right? That's month.
Right. So you can Google that very easily. Just look up your date time formats, and you'll get that. I didn't think of that beforehand, so I just thought of that as we were going through this. That becomes very handy when you want to output it in a specific format, and like I said, if you want to put that into some kind of string output.
Yeah. Now Kevin does ask, so the most accurate web or other query for timestamps to the micro or the nanosecond. So ironically, now again, right? So he then references like the New York Stock Exchange.
Right.
So we're in this scenario, we're actually dependent on our administrators to help make sure that the clocks are correct.
Right.
And there could be some discrepancy there. However, from a system perspective, the system is marking the time, and that's not going to change as long as it knows how to keep the seconds. Right, SQL Server can always grab that from the system and then execute with it. If you're worried about microseconds like into the web, that's way beyond this class.
Right. Okay, so there are some other common functions that can be used, and one is trying to think of a good reason to use isDate, but isDate actually will tell you whether a string is in a valid date format. And one of those reasons might be if you have a column that does not have a date, an actual date defined as a data type. Let's say you have a varchar, a string of column that holds dates for some reason. Whoever developed the database for some reason didn't define it correctly. You can test it before you process it. So if you wanted to do another, do some date math or whatever on it, you can test to see if a certain value is actually a date field that you could do, a date add-on or another date function. So obviously, if I send SDP for SQL Data Partners, it returns a 0 and tells you that is not a valid date. And obviously, if I use get date, which we just saw up at the top, that is a valid format. One thing that I found very interesting, which I didn't know actually until today, was if you use the datetime2 format, for some reason the SQL isDate function does not work with the datetime2 format.
That's
so
right.
if you have the extended nanoseconds, it actually returns 0 for being a valid date.
Yeah, because
I guess it's telling you it's not a valid date time. Because it's actually a date time too.
Right.
So anyway, that's as you get more complex into your coding, that is something that you might use like in a case statement or something. So we don't really want to spend a whole lot on that. Something that does come in handy that I use a lot is your day, month, and year functions. And what those give you is, just say as it says, your day of whatever. I'm using get date for my examples here, but this could be any date field, any date or date time field. And so if you have a column in your table that has a date field, and you want to know what day of the year it was, or what month, or what year, and you want to actually pull it out. So if I process, let me just go ahead and process all three of these. So select day of get date, which is today's date, gives me 16. Select month gives me 12, and select year gives me 2021, just what you would expect. But that gives you the ability to, to a lot of times you might just want the year. And you might want to break out the year, the month, and the day into separate columns for some reason. Maybe you're going to do some math on the months, or you're going to,
right. Or I only want to see orders from this month, or this
right,
month,
right,
this year, or
right. And so that's pretty straightforward. Now there's two other functions that I think come in really handy, and one is the date name function. And what I use that for most of the time is if I want to get the actual weekday, like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But it also will give you the the day number. So day is the day number, weekday is the actual. Here, let's just go ahead and run this. So weekday actually returns the actual name of the. Let me. I don't have the Zoom like Carlos did, but weekday is returning Thursday. So today is Thursday, and I said, select date name weekday of today's date. And so that returns Thursday. Month returns December. So you can actually get if you need to use this in your SQL code to actually spell out the actual day and not the number of the week or the number of the month, and you want to pull that in. That's what I would use this for most, is pull in Thursday, or the weekday and the month name. Does that make so that's pretty simple. You can actually get the week number, the quarter number, which is at the bottom there. So we're in quarter number 4. The day of the year, which we're the 350th day of the year, that can come in handy sometimes to know what day of the year you're in. So you've got a lot of flexibility in there with the date name function.
Yep.
Now, real quick, there's also I just had this. This is just the same thing, but in a simpler view. So you've got your day, week, day, month, day of year, and so forth. So we don't need to spend any time on that. So now the next thing is the date part function, which the biggest difference between date name and date part is date name returns a string, date part returns an int. So with date part, I would normally use date part if I just want the number. If I wanted the integer number of the weekday, the month, the day of the year, I would use date part. Even though I can get those same results from date name, which is why I would use date name if I want, the actual string of the name of the day or the name of the month. But I believe that you're better off using date part if all you need is the actual number. But you can see where you can actually get that same information in a couple of different places. Now to our math functions. Hope I'm not going too fast. I just kind of want to get this all in. Date add actually does your math on your dates. And in my examples here, I'm using numbers, but where I have 3 here, date add takes the date part, which is your day, your month, or your year. There's a few others, but for simplicity, let's just keep it at that. Where I've got 3, I'm saying I want to add 3 to the current date. So I want to add 3 days to the current date in my first example, and in my second, I want to subtract 3. Now I could actually use another field in here if I wanted to. Like if I wanted to pass, let's not even go down that for the simplicity of this example. Let's just say we wanted to use the numbers. So let me run this real quick. So I'm adding 3 to the day in the first 2 columns, 3 to I'm 3 and I'm subtracting 3. to the day, month, and the year, so you can see what your results are. So you can see
so this is going to be in examples where you want a rolling, right? So I need the last 7 days, the last 30 days,
right?
Like right now, I'm in the middle of the month. I may not just want to see this current month, but I want to see last 30 days.
Right. Yeah. I could say where my date field is greater than date add, day minus 30.
Right.
From the current date, and that's a very useful purpose of this. And then the other one that comes in very handy is the date diff function, which date diff just takes two dates and tells you what the difference is based on what you're looking for. The date, the number of days difference, number of months difference, number of year difference. So in this example, I'm using various dates here. But in my first example, I'm just returning the day, and I'm comparing it to December 1, 2021. And I just wanted to give you an example of the order of your date fields makes a difference. So you can see if I do a date diff between 12/1/2021 and today's date, I get a positive 15. But if I switch the get date in the 12/1/2021 date, I get a negative 15. So you just got to be aware of what order you have those in, what values are being returned. So if you say where date diff is greater than 30, you need to know if that's the 30 days previous or if that's the 30 days, from now. So that comes in very handy. I will caution that when you use functions in your where clause, it can create some, you can take a hit performance-wise. So if it's a very simple query, using that function, a date diff function in your where clause is probably no big deal. But actually, if you've got a very complex query on a very big database, a lot of times as you get more advanced, you might do the date diff function and assign that to a variable and use that variable in your where clause of your query and say, greater than, because anytime you do a function in the where clause, it can affect performance. And
bite you.
Yep. So that's the main things that you'll do with date. Now back over here to our examples with our database. In this example, Carlos is showing us he wants to get the age of the dog. So he's giving us the name of the dog, and then he's doing a date diff. And he's using YY here, which is the abbreviation for year. So you can actually type in year there as well. He's pulling in the birth date of the dog, and then he's comparing it to today's date. And that's going to give us the age of all of the dogs. So that's a very, very good example of how you could use date diff. And in this case, you see I was mentioning it being in the where clause before. In this case, it's in the select statement. So that wouldn't affect performance nearly as much as using it in a where clause. Down below, we have another example here with the birth dates of the cats. And he's doing age in human years to using the date diff function and multiplying it by 7. That's pretty cool. So that gives us the cat age in human years. That's pretty cool. And I think let's see what else we have. We have, we're getting the year. Here's where he's using the year that I talked about before to find out the actual birth year, because he's passing the birth date of the dog, and he's pulling that year in. So whoops, I didn't I didn't highlight the whole thing here. So that gives you the birth year. And what are we doing for the count number? Okay, he's using the group by function, and we're finding out how many dogs were born in each year in this example. So that's kind of using some of what we learned in the past session and using that along with our new year function. And that's the last example we have there.
There we go. So anyway, thanks everybody for coming to our session.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.
SQL Data Partners.